Welcome to Xnoesis. As the soft twilight descends, inviting contemplation and stillness, we embark on a journey into the intricate and often unsettling tapestry of our biological future. Tonight we delve into the very essence of what it means to be human and how the accelerating currents of genetic science threaten to reshape our definitions, our desires, and our destiny in ways that transcend mere understanding, gently guiding us into a realm where the lines between creator and created begin to blur. Consider for a moment the profound suffering etched into the very fabric of existence by conditions that defy our current understanding and capacity to heal. Imagine a disease known as fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP. This isn't just a challenge. It is a relentless, devastating genetic condition where the very essence of human movement is slowly, agonizingly stolen. Muscles, tendons, and ligaments, these supple, vital components that allow us to stretch, to stride, to embrace, gradually, inexorably, transform into solid bone. Picture the horror, the profound despair, as the soft tissues that define your mobility stiffen, calcify, and fuse, rendering joints immobile, turning a living, breathing body into a progressively rigid, stony statue. Each movement becomes a battle, each breath a struggle, as the ribcage ossifies, each embrace a memory as limbs become fixed. The individual's world shrinks, confined within their own petrified frame. The sheer physical pain is immense, but perhaps even more devastating is the psychological torment of watching one's own body betray its fundamental purpose. This relentless march of ossification can affect any part of the body, from the jaws to the spine, leading to chronic pain, severe disability, and an agonizing loss of independence. There is no known cure for this relentless march of ossification. Current treatments are merely palliative, aimed at managing symptoms rather than addressing the root cause. The expected lifespan for someone born with WOP, even with the most meticulous and compassionate care, rarely extends beyond 4 decades. It is a life of unimaginable physical constraint, an existence defined by progressive loss of function, constant pain, and the ever-present, chilling awareness of what the next calcification might take away. The frustration of medical researchers facing such an intractable condition is palpable, a constant reminder of the vast frontiers yet to be conquered in understanding the human genome. Then there is the chilling specter of fatal familial insomnia. This is not merely a severe lack of sleep, the kind that leaves one weary and dull. No, this is an absolute, unyielding inability to enter the restorative embrace of slumber, a condition where the very mechanisms of sleep are irrevocably broken. It begins subtly, perhaps with mild insomnia, but quickly escalates into a complete and terrifying cessation of sleep. No sedative, no matter its potency, can coax the mind into rest. The brain simply refuses to shut down. The disease progressively ravages a specific region of the brain called the thalamus, leading to a cascade of terrifying symptoms. Incessant panic attacks that seize the individual in a relentless grip of terror, vivid and disturbing hallucinations that warp reality, and a devastating, rapid weight loss that marks the body's internal collapse as it consumes itself without the vital repair and regulation that sleep provides. The autonomic nervous system, responsible for unconscious bodily functions, becomes severely dysregulated, leading to wildly fluctuating blood pressure, heart rate, and body temperature. Over time, the afflicted individual loses the capacity for coherent speech, then the ability to react to any external stimuli, becoming tragically trapped within their own failing body, observing the world but unable to engage, their consciousness fading into an abyss of waking confusion. The prognosis is grim, a journey into oblivion culminating in death within an average of 18 months from the onset of symptoms. Again, for this merciless condition, no treatment exists, no respite. It is a direct assault on consciousness itself, a waking nightmare from which there is no escape, a profound testament to the delicate balance of our biological machinery. And finally, consider the heart-wrenching condition of premature aging, a cruel twist of fate that begins its relentless acceleration not in old age, but in the tender vulnerability of infancy. Children afflicted with this syndrome, often known as progeria, exhibit all the outward signs of extreme old age at an alarming pace: brittle bones that fracture easily, hair loss leading to early baldness, aged and thin skin, and the accelerated onset of cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes, the very ailments typically associated with the twilight years of life. Their small bodies, at a cellular level, are racing against time, aging at a terrifying pace due to a specific mutation in the LMNA gene, which produces a faulty protein called progerin. This protein damages the cell nucleus, leading to rapid cellular senescence and premature tissue breakdown. Despite the dedicated efforts of medical science, attempts at treatment remain largely palliative, aimed at managing the myriad symptoms and improving quality of life. But a truly satisfactory method to halt or reverse this accelerated decline remains elusive. The devastating prognosis for these young souls is an average lifespan of just 15 years, a brief, poignant existence marked by the ravages of a lifespan condensed into childhood. These diseases, thankfully, are exceedingly rare. For those who suffer, however, such statistical rarity offers scant comfort. Any individual enduring such conditions would undoubtedly advocate for every possible measure, every conceivable scientific endeavor, to ensure that not 10, not even one person in a million, would ever again experience the devastating consequences of these cruel genetic lottery tickets. The ethical imperative to alleviate such suffering is immense, driving much of the current research in genomics. The scope of this challenge is vast. Today, we stand at a precipice of understanding, with over 6,000 known genetic disorders meticulously cataloged in medical literature. And with each passing year, new genetic anomalies are identified and described, expanding this already daunting list, revealing ever more intricate ways in which our genetic code can malfunction. Now consider a sobering statistic that highlights the chasm between our knowledge and our therapeutic capabilities. Out of these more than 6,000 known conditions, do you know how many are currently amenable to any form of treatment that can meaningfully alter their course? A mere 600. That's right, only about 10% of known genetic diseases can be effectively treated with our current medical arsenal. The vast majority remain beyond our reach, silent or raging, incurable specters. This stark figure underscores the immense complexity of genetic diseases, which often involve multiple genes, intricate regulatory pathways, or manifest in ways that are deeply intertwined with the fundamental processes of life itself, making simple interventions incredibly difficult. Ethical barriers, too, sometimes limit research into certain conditions, adding another layer of challenge. Furthermore, the silent, pervasive presence of genetic predispositions touches us all, far more intimately than many realize. A staggering 24% of the global population carries at least one genetic variant that predisposes them to a disease or condition, even if they themselves never manifest overt symptoms. These are the hidden genetic whispers within our double helix, subtle predispositions to conditions like heart disease, certain cancers, autoimmune disorders, or even specific neurological vulnerabilities. They influence our health, our vulnerabilities, and our potential, often without our conscious awareness, shaping the trajectory of our lives in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. This means that a quarter of all humanity lives with a ticking genetic clock, a subtle risk that could, under the right environmental triggers, manifest as significant illness. The solution, at least in principle, appears elegantly clear: to address the root cause, to intervene directly at the source, and to edit the very genes themselves. If a faulty instruction leads to disease, why not rewrite that instruction, correcting the biological typo before it can wreak havoc? This line of thought, however, leads us into profoundly complex territory, a space where scientific potential collides with profound ethical and societal implications. In 2016, for the very first time in its history, the U.S. National Intelligence Agency included genome editing in its classification of weapons of mass destruction. Pause for a moment and consider the weight of that categorization. Genetic editing, a tool with the potential to eradicate suffering, placed alongside nuclear missiles and chemical weapons. This wasn't a casual inclusion. It was a deliberate, stark recognition of the dual-use nature of this technology and its potential for catastrophic misuse. To understand this startling classification, we must rewind 4 years to 2012, the year a groundbreaking technology burst onto the global scientific stage. This was CRISPR-Cas9, an acronym for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats, and its associated protein 9. It functions as a precise molecular scissor, a biological search and replace function for DNA. This genome editing tool was not only remarkably effective, but also astonishingly cheap and widely accessible, far simpler to use than previous gene editing methods. Suddenly, almost anyone with a modest laboratory setup, some might even say in their kitchen, though that's an overstatement for practical, sophisticated application, gained the unprecedented ability to precisely replace or delete fragments of DNA within living organisms. CRISPR works by using a guide RNA molecule to precisely locate a specific sequence of DNA. Then, the Cas9 enzyme acts like a molecular scalpel, cutting the DNA at that exact point. The cell then attempts to repair this break, and scientists can introduce new DNA sequences to rewrite or modify the genetic code with unprecedented precision. The simplest, most immediate answer to the intelligence community's concern was this. In previous eras, the development of biological weapons demanded colossal resources, vast financial investment, and sophisticated, powerful scientific and industrial infrastructure. It was a domain exclusively accessible to well-funded state actors. But now, with the advent of synthetic biology and tools like CRISPR, the possibility emerged to create pathogens specifically engineered for mass casualties, rapidly, efficiently, and perhaps most disturbingly, with a degree of stealth and precision previously unimaginable. This democratization of bioengineering capabilities changed the entire threat landscape. No longer was the creation of potent biological agents restricted to the most powerful nations. Now, a rogue group or even a highly skilled individual could, in theory, cause widespread devastation. Indeed, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, recognizing the profound implications, prepared a comprehensive 221-page report for the military establishment on this very topic. This monumental document represented one of the very first attempts to provide a thorough, multi-dimensional assessment of the threats posed by CRISPR technology. Prior to this, the scientific and intelligence communities had been awash with a multitude of diverse opinions, often fragmented and specialized. It was precisely this lack of a unified, holistic understanding that prompted the Pentagon to approach the entire Academy of Sciences, seeking an overarching, consolidated evaluation of these emerging threats.
and that
The
he was now a
intelligence
citizen
community
of a new country.
wasn't just concerned
But was
about
Rip Van Winkle
bioweapons.
really a time
They
traveler?
considered broader
Or was he just a
implications,
victim of a prank
such as
or hallucination?
unintended ecological
The most likely
disruption
explanation is
if
that Irving made
genetically
up a-
engineered organisms were released, or the potential for societal instability if human enhancement technologies were to create stark genetic divisions. The ethical slippery slope, from treating disease to enhancing traits, was also a major concern, as it could fundamentally alter what it means to be human and create new forms of inequality. And what did these eminent scientists offer as examples of potential threats? They discussed, for instance, the creation of artificial viruses, raising the chilling specter of engineered smallpox. They gravely asserted that experiments were already underway to engineer deadly viruses, against which no existing vaccine offered protection, and other such dire pronouncements, focusing primarily on the immediate, tangible dangers of weaponized pathogens. However, for those with a wider perspective, a deeper sense of imagination, all of this, while technically accurate and certainly worthy of concern,
when they
feels
compared notes
somewhat
and realized that they
pedestrian.
had experienced the
It's
same
almost
thing.
mundane.
They also did
What?
some research
More
and found out that
viruses?
some of the people
More
and
engineered
details they saw
bacteria?
matched
One might
historical
exclaim.
records from the late
Have we
18th
lost our
century.
minds,
They
focusing on
concluded
such
that they had
conventional
somehow
dangers?
slipped back in
We are
time
talking
and
about the
witnessed scenes from
perils of
before the
gene
French
editing,
Revolution.
the
They wrote a book
manipulation
about
of
their
the very
experience
fundamental
titled An
code that
Adventure,
defines
which was
all
published
living
in
things,
1911.
that makes
The book
every
caused a
organism
lot of
precisely
controversy
what
and
it
debate,
is.
as
Is
some
there
people
truly
believe their
no
story,
greater leap
while
of
others dismissed
imagination
it as a
available
hoax,
to us?
a hallucination,
These
or a
concerns,
misinterpretation.
while valid for national
incident has never been
security,
fully
merely
explained,
scratch the
and it remains
surface
one of the
of the
most famous
profound
examples of alleged
existential
time slips,
questions
which are
raised by
sudden
our
and
newfound
temporary shifts
ability
to
to
another time
rewrite
period.
the book of life.
Another well-known
The
example
true
of
threats and
purported time
opportunities
travel is that
lie
of
not
John
just
Titor,
in
who claimed
creating
to be
new
a soldier from the
diseases,
year
but in
2036.
fundamentally
He appeared on
altering
several
the
online
blueprint
forums
of
between
humanity
2000
itself.
and 2001,
If
where he
I were
posted messages
tasked
about his
with
mission,
preparing a
his world,
report for the
and his
U.S.
predictions for the
intelligence
future.
community,
He said that he was
one
sent back
that
in time
aimed to
in
outline the
1975,
asterisk, true, profound, and transformative threats and opportunities of genetic editing, it would encompass themes far grander and far more unsettling than mere biological warfare. What follows in this monologue is my attempt to explore these deeper currents, to provoke a quiet contemplation of what truly lies ahead. Of course, let me clarify, this is, in part, a playful speculative exercise, a journey into the realm of what if. I humbly bow my head before the titans of the Academy of Sciences. Their work is a monumental, titanic achievement of scientific rigor, grounded in immediate, tangible threats. For the kind of imaginative, philosophical wildness I am about to unleash, I would, in the best-case scenario, probably just be politely shown the door, perhaps with a kindly suggestion to stick to more empirical matters. But the purpose of Xnoesis is to venture beyond the immediate, into the long shadows of the future. So let us step back and examine the question of gene editing from a much broader vantage point, inviting a quiet curiosity into the nature of existence itself. Consider for a moment the human face. What do you experience when you encounter a face that you instinctively find appealing? It is a subtle, internal resonance, isn't it? A sense of recognition, perhaps even a quiet, unconscious aesthetic pleasure. We are undeniably drawn to faces that conform to our internalized, often unspoken ideals of beauty. But what exactly constitutes a beautiful face? There's a common saying, a comforting notion that beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, suggesting that all perception of attractiveness is inherently subjective, deeply personal, and varies wildly across individuals, across different ages, eras, ethnicities, and cultures. This idea implies a chaotic, diverse landscape of aesthetic preference, where no universal standard could possibly exist. However, when we delve into the rigorous scientific investigations of facial beauty, a more nuanced and compelling picture emerges. Studies, conducted across vast populations and diverse demographics, reliably demonstrate a striking consistency. Independent of tradition, age, nationality, or any other demographic variable, there exists a remarkably clear and consistent agreement among any given group of people regarding precisely which faces are perceived as most attractive. This suggests that the beautiful face is not merely a subjective preference, but rather a category with universal, cross-cultural appeal, rooted in deeper biological signals. The features we universally find attractive, symmetry, clear skin, certain proportional ratios, often correlate with indicators of health, fertility, and genetic fitness, traits that were evolutionarily advantageous to recognize. A fascinating insight into this phenomenon came from Sir Francis Galton, a prodigious Victorian polymath, statistician, and cousin of Charles Darwin. Galton was a pioneer in many fields, and among his innovations was the development of the, quote, composite portrait technology. His original aim was, in part, to identify characteristic facial features of criminals by overlaying multiple photographs, hoping to find a common, defining trait. What he discovered, however, was something far more profound and intriguing. To create a composite portrait, Galton would superimpose numerous photographs of individual faces onto a single photographic plate, creating an averaged, blurred, yet distinct image that represented the composite of the entire sample. And he noticed something remarkable. Each individual face, when viewed separately, was almost invariably perceived as less attractive than the averaged composite image. It was as if the overlaid faces, in their collective average, somehow converged upon the outline of an ideal, a quintessential form of beauty to which they all, in their individual variations, unconsciously aspired. This observation begs a profound question: what exactly is happening here? What underlying mechanisms drive this universal preference? The average face tends to be more symmetrical, and a lack of overt asymmetry is often a subtle indicator of good health and robust development, as extreme environmental stressors or genetic mutations can disrupt symmetry during development. An average face also smooths out individual blemishes or deviations that might be unconsciously registered as potential markers for disease or genetic abnormalities. It represents the statistically optimal, well-adapted human form. Our face is an incredibly potent indicator, a crucial signal that conveys a wealth of information about our health, our vitality, and our genetic fitness. It is so profoundly important, in fact, that through countless millennia of evolution, we have developed an astonishing capacity to assess another person's external attractiveness in the merest fraction of a second, a tenth of a second, to be precise. And we do this without conscious effort. This rapid, automatic assessment bypasses our rational, deliberate thought processes, because it is governed by the ancient, foundational structures of our brain. It is an instinctual, almost reptilian response, honed by eons of mate selection and survival pressures. Only after this primal, unconscious evaluation has occurred do our conscious minds construct a narrative to rationalize our initial impression. Perhaps we decide the person's appeal lies in their perceived competence, their charisma, or some other learned attribute. This halo effect is a well-documented cognitive bias, where positive impressions in one area, like attractiveness, influence our overall perception of a person's other qualities. I referred to the beautiful face as an indicator. But an indicator of what? Precisely. Why is a beautiful face beautiful? There are various hypotheses, but arguably the most robust and scientifically supported suggests that attractive facial features are subtly, yet powerfully, associated with those genes that have proven most successful, most adaptive, across the vast canvas of evolutionary history. When we gaze upon a composite image of human faces, we are, in a sense, witnessing the preferred, time-tested middle ground of genetic expression. This genetic sweet spot often indicates heterozygosity, meaning a healthy mix of different gene variants, which can confer greater resilience against diseases and environmental challenges. Stark deviations from this average, much like aiming wildly off-center at a target, carry inherent risks. It is often safest and most advantageous to cluster around the evolutionary mean, the genetic sweet spot that signifies health, resilience, and reproductive viability, a testament to the wisdom of millennia of natural selection. And if we consider attractiveness in a broader sense, beyond just facial features, the advantages are undeniable. A conventionally attractive appearance bestows a myriad of benefits that permeate social interactions and life outcomes. Psychological studies have consistently shown that attractive individuals are generally perceived as more trustworthy, perhaps due to an implicit bias linking beauty with goodness. They are often assumed to be more competent, even without direct evidence of their skills, an example of the aforementioned halo effect. Their positive qualities are noticed more quickly, perhaps even amplified by the inherent bias of the beholder, while their flaws might be overlooked or minimized. They tend to earn higher incomes, a sobering reality in many professions where appearance, consciously or unconsciously, plays a role in hiring, promotion, and client interaction. And, perhaps most unsettlingly, studies have shown that more attractive children often receive greater care and affection from their parents, a phenomenon that underscores the deep-seated, unconscious biases that influence even our most fundamental relationships. Yes, this is a stark, sometimes uncomfortable truth. Attractive individuals, quite simply, tend to navigate life with greater ease and often achieve success more readily, purely due to these unconscious societal biases and inherent biological advantages. This brings me to a direct question for you, the listener. Have you ever regretted certain aspects of your own physical appearance that you know, deep down, are beyond your ability to change, precisely because they are rooted in your genetic blueprint? Most of us, for instance, are unlikely to ever find ourselves gracefully striding down a fashion runway as a supermodel, for the same fundamental reason that the National Basketball Association features no players who stand a mere 150 centimeters tall. Our genetic endowment sets inherent limits on our physical potential, no matter how much effort we expend. Our cultural narratives, pervasive in books, films, and motivational speeches, often champion the idea that truly great athletes, or any highly successful individuals, achieve their eminence solely through unwavering dedication, relentless hard work, and an unshakable belief in their goals. And these stories often imply that we too can achieve similar heights if only we apply ourselves sufficiently. But this, I must gently suggest, is not entirely accurate. We simply cannot, in every instance, replicate such achievements. While determination and effort are crucial, they operate within a framework of genetic predispositions that fundamentally shape our potential. Consider the compelling insights offered by David Epstein in his book, The Sports Gene. He recounts the story of Eero Mäntyranta, a Finnish cross-country skier of legendary status. Between 1960 and 1972, Mäntyranta secured 7 Olympic medals, including 3 gold, and won 2 world championships. This phenomenal athlete possessed not only incredible diligence and an indomitable spirit, but also, as a crucial minor detail, an exceedingly rare genetic mutation. This mutation in a gene called EPOR, erythropoietin receptor, allowed his body to produce significantly higher levels of hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells responsible for transporting oxygen from the lungs to the tissues. This biological advantage dramatically enhanced his endurance, giving him a physiological edge that no amount of training alone could confer on an average athlete. His body was simply more efficient at oxygen delivery, allowing him to sustain peak performance for longer. While success in elite sports is, without question, a complex interplay of myriad factors such as nutrition, coaching, strategic opportunities, psychological resilience, and plain good fortune, this does not negate the critical, often decisive role that individual genes can play in setting the upper limits of potential. Mantirenta's case is a powerful illustration of how a single genetic variant can provide a profound, almost unfair advantage. For instance, many people possess a mutation in the ACTN3 gene, one of a large, yet still incompletely understood, number of genes that influence the speed of muscle contraction. ACTN3 produces a protein called alpha-ACTININ3, found exclusively in fast-twitch muscle fibers, which are responsible for explosive, powerful movements. Some individuals carry 2 copies of a deficient variant of this gene, the XX genotype, meaning they do not produce any functional alpha-ACTININ3. Despite extensive research into genes affecting athletic performance, ACTN3 remains the single gene most consistently linked to a predisposition for power-based sports like sprinting and weightlifting. When researchers deactivated this gene in mice, the animals exhibited a significant reduction in muscle strength and speed. While possessing the correct variant of ACTN3, the RR genotype, certainly won't magically transform you into a world-class sprinter. Numerous studies have shown that if you carry 2 broken copies of the ACTN3 gene, your chances of winning an Olympic medal in a power sport are effectively 0. It's not about effort here, it's about the fundamental biological machinery that underpins peak performance. You can train relentlessly, but if your muscle fibers lack this crucial protein, you simply won't have the same explosive power as someone who does. Conversely, imagine having a mutation in the MSTN gene, which inhibits the production of myostatin. Myostatin is a protein that actively suppresses muscle tissue formation, essentially acting as a brake on muscle growth. If your body cannot produce this protein effectively, or produces a non-functional version, your muscles would grow with astonishing rapidity, far faster than those of others, almost as if on a biological steroid. You heard that correctly. Your own body, in its natural state, actively hinders you from developing an ideal physique because muscle tissue is an incredibly resource-intensive investment for the body, demanding significant energy and protein. Evolution, in its wisdom, carefully meters its production to optimize resource allocation. Yet when a mutation occurs in this gene, it leads to remarkable individuals, such as the German boy, whose case was documented in a July 2004 study. Observe the extraordinary muscular development of this 7-month-old infant, whose muscles were almost comically large for his age. It is perhaps unnecessary to state that he was significantly stronger than his peers. A similar situation arose with an American child named Liam Hoekstra, who by the age of 8 months possessed the strength to perform pull-ups, displaying incredible power for his age. Studies in animals further corroborate this. Blocking myostatin leads to a substantial increase in lean muscle mass, with an almost complete absence of body fat. Take a moment to consider the sight of double-muscled mice, dogs, and cattle genetically engineered or naturally mutated to lack functional myostatin. How would that affect your own efforts at the gym? Would you not be intrigued by the prospect of acquiring such a mutation, especially in an age of abundant calories and widespread desire for physical prowess? Is it not, for many, a dream to build muscle with minimal effort, to defy the natural limits of one's own physiology? And while engaging in physical training can undoubtedly confer beneficial effects on your cognitive abilities and overall well-being, you will ultimately be confined by what is known as your reaction norm, a genetically determined potential, a bandwidth within which your abilities can be developed. For example, your genes might provide a reaction norm for muscle growth that ranges from a lean, athletic physique to a moderately muscular one, but perhaps never to the bulk of a professional bodybuilder, no matter how intensely you train. Similarly, your cognitive abilities might improve with learning and mental exercise, but they will operate within a genetically circumscribed range. Beyond this inherent, genetically encoded limit, whether for muscle growth or memory enhancement, you unfortunately cannot progress. As the pioneering psychogeneticist Robert Plomin famously observed, with a resigned gesture, if a child has a poor memory, it will probably remain poor, no matter how hard teachers and parents try. They will not grow up to be the world's best mathematician. This does not negate the power of effort or environment, but it does highlight the foundational role of genetic potential. It suggests that while environments can foster or hinder the expression of genetic traits, they rarely create abilities that are entirely absent from the genetic blueprint. If genes play such an immense role in shaping a human life, influencing not only physical attributes but also complex traits like cognitive ability and athletic potential, then it stands to reason that genome editing, at least in the long term, is not merely a possibility but an inevitability. And this inevitability extends far beyond the realm of inherited diseases. Do you desire for your child to possess a keen intellect, to be inherently smart? Is there any parent who would genuinely answer no to that question, given the widely recognized advantages of higher cognitive function? I know some of my previous discussions have stirred strong reactions, even anger in some listeners. But it remains a truth that we currently do not possess reliable, direct methods to significantly boost raw intelligence in a meaningful way. One of the most widely used metrics for intelligence, IQ tests, offers a window into this complex trait. IQ scores, while influenced by environment and education, do show remarkable stability throughout life, and as individuals mature, the genetic component of IQ becomes increasingly prominent, accounting for a larger proportion of the variance in scores. Many of our cognitive abilities, which proved incredibly advantageous for our ancestors, such as memory, pattern recognition, language acquisition, and mathematical aptitude, are inherently interconnected, forming a general cognitive factor. This means that individuals who perform highly in one type of cognitive test typically score well across almost all other cognitive assessments. This interconnectedness forms the very foundation of the concept of measurable intelligence. However, all of this pales in significance when confronted with the following fact. Numerous studies have consistently demonstrated that IQ is profoundly linked to an individual's overall health, their level of education, their professional success, and their longevity. And, perhaps, this should come as no surprise. It is not uncommon for individuals with above-average intelligence to navigate educational systems more effectively, make more informed choices about their health and lifestyle, secure higher-paying positions, and manage complex challenges more effectively, all of which contribute to better health outcomes, greater social mobility, and a longer lifespan. Of course, this is not always the case. Life is far too complex for such simple determinism, and many factors beyond IQ contribute to a fulfilling life. I recall during my school years ardently wishing that we would finally be offered a professional aptitude test, much like those depicted in American films. It seemed, to my young mind, to be one of the most crucial elements in navigating one's life path, a roadmap for one's future. Alas, it never came to pass. The idea of aligning one's innate talents with a career path seems so logical, so empowering. While this may sound somewhat unsettling or even dystopian to some, I am convinced that in the not-too-distant future, we will approach the determination of an individual's predispositions for particular professions with a profound reliance on their specific genotype. This isn't about rigid predestination, but rather about informed guidance, a deep understanding of innate strengths and weaknesses. Currently, we lack an expansive, statistically robust database linking specific professional fields to particular genetic configurations. However, the foundational tools for such insights are already being developed, with AI and large genomic datasets paving the way. Such a future could revolutionize education and career planning, reducing square pegs in round holes and fostering greater individual fulfillment. It could also, however, raise profound questions about individual autonomy and the risk of creating a genetic caste system where one's professional destiny is partly written in their DNA. The truth is, people often profoundly underestimate the contribution of their genetic inheritance to their cognitive faculties, to their ability to flex their gray matter, so to speak. Instead, there's a common tendency to declare, "You're just lazy, you lack patience, pull yourself together." And often, such assertions hold a degree of validity for individuals operating within a typical cognitive range. But what many fail to grasp is the experience of genuinely low IQ. I, too, did not fully comprehend it until I witnessed it firsthand, a powerful lesson in empathy. Years ago, I worked in a factory on an assembly line comprising 8 distinct stages. Each stage was designed to be quickly mastered by any worker with average cognitive abilities. Then, a new colleague joined us. He seemed, outwardly, no different from the rest, carrying the same hopes and needs. Yet, throughout an entire shift, he simply could not master the very first stage. To help you visualize, this initial stage involved inserting an aluminum radiator into a plastic container and securing it with 3 screws. It was a simple, repetitive task requiring minimal dexterity and sequential understanding. For 8 hours he labored, he struggled, he puffed and panted, his brow furrowed in concentration, but he could not complete the task. He was not lazy, he was genuinely unable to grasp the sequence or the motor skills required. The following day he was let go. My understanding is that individuals like him exist, often hidden or struggling in the margins, and many among them may possess an admirable work ethic and a desire to contribute. However, tasks that most of us accomplish without a second thought, things we learn almost unconsciously, can prove profoundly challenging for them. No one suggests that genetics are the sole determinant of everything, but their significance in shaping our fundamental capabilities is immense and often underestimated. 4 billion years of evolution. It is a vast, almost incomprehensible stretch of time, and it is not a matter to be trifled with. Everything that defines our biology, every nuance of our physical and mental makeup, is the direct result of this colossal expanse of time, a tapestry woven by countless generations of survival and adaptation. For those 4 billion years, evolution unfolded according to a consistent, unchanging set of rules: natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, gene flow. But now, as Jamie Metzl argues in his illuminating book, Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering, and the Future of Humanity, the rules have fundamentally changed. We are no longer passive subjects of natural selection. We are poised to become its architects. Indeed, in writing this very monologue, I have drawn heavily upon his insights and his vision of the future, a future that demands deep contemplation. Who is Jamie Metzl? I imagine some of you might be wondering, perhaps even shifting restlessly. I shall explain. Jamie Metzl is a technological futurist, an American author, and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, which advises NATO. His distinguished career has included roles in the National Security Council, the U.S. State Department, and numerous other influential bodies, giving him a unique perspective at the intersection of science, policy, and global strategy. And yes, in his book he attempts to predict the future trajectory of humanity, a pursuit that, on the surface, might seem like one of the most audacious, even foolish, endeavors of contemporary human thought, given the inherent unpredictability of the future. But not always. Consider the stark contrast. In 1962, when U.S. President John F. Kennedy ascended the podium in Houston and delivered his now iconic speech, declaring that the United States would send a human to the moon before the decade was out, he was not engaging in blind fantasy or wishful thinking. He was risking the credibility of the U.S. at the height of the Cold War, wasn't he? Or was he truly? In 1962, almost all the fundamental technologies required for a successful lunar landing already existed. The powerful Saturn V rockets were in development. Heat shields capable of atmospheric re-entry were being refined, robust life support systems were being miniaturized, and computers capable of performing the necessary mathematical calculations for orbital mechanics and guidance were emerging, albeit in primitive forms by today's standards. Kennedy wasn't merely dreaming aloud, he was making precise, informed deductions based on existing technologies that required only further refinement, scaling, and integration, not entirely new scientific breakthroughs. The inevitability of the event was, to those in the know, palpable, a matter of political will and focused engineering. And indeed, just 7 years later, the impossible became reality. The genetic transformation of our species is no longer speculative science fiction. It is a looming biological reality. And many of you may not have been fully aware of this until this very moment, perhaps still viewing gene editing as a distant, abstract concept. This is because public understanding of scientific progress tends to increase linearly, steadily, step by step, gradually incorporating new information into existing frameworks, whereas science itself develops exponentially at an ever-accelerating pace, often leaping beyond our capacity to fully grasp its implications. So, what I am about to discuss, as Jamie Metzl suggests, is not merely probable, but in essence, inevitable. All the necessary conceptual and technological instruments are already present, or rapidly emerging from laboratories around the globe. The only question that remains is whether these profound changes will unfold within the coming decades, or perhaps within a century. One thing we can state with a degree of certainty is this: within 100 years, in developed nations, the process of having children will fundamentally diverge from how we have approached it until now, moving from a matter of chance to a matter of choice. Let me present an image, a concept for your consideration. Does the notion of a woman born on July 25, 1978, in England, strike you as somehow unnatural or even intrinsically wrong? The newspapers of the world at the time certainly thought so, hailing her as the baby of the century. The global media frenzy around her birth was unprecedented. A poll conducted in the United States just months after her birth revealed a staggering awareness. 93% of Americans had heard of this English infant, a testament to the profound societal impact of her arrival. Who was this profoundly significant individual? Her name was Louise Brown, the world's first child conceived in a glass dish, or more formally, through in vitro fertilization, abbreviated as IVF. This method is employed when couples are unable to conceive a child through conventional means, offering a beacon of hope where previously there was only despair. You might readily assert that this is a remarkable triumph of technology, a compassionate solution that enabled previously infertile couples to experience the joy of parenthood, a truly humanitarian application of science. However, not everyone, especially at the time, would have agreed with your sentiment. Louise Brown's parents, in the wake of her birth, received a torrent of hate mail, including packages stained with what appeared to be blood containing plastic embryos. These threats and condemnations stemmed from deep-seated fears about designer babies, playing God, and interfering with the natural order. Catholic theologians, among others, condemned the process of creating children in a test tube as a moral abomination and something profoundly unnatural, arguing it detached procreation from the marital act and treated human life as a commodity. These arguments echoed historical anxieties about scientific progress, challenging established religious and philosophical tenets regarding human life and its origins. Indeed, humans often harbor rather peculiar notions of what constitutes natural. There's a widespread belief that we should exclusively embrace natural elements in our lives, striving to live in harmony with an idealized vision of nature. Yet, many who espouse this view have little understanding of what it truly entails. Let me offer a few vivid examples that challenge this romanticized ideal. Do you recognize this? This is corn, not the plump, golden sweet corn we enjoy today, but its wild ancestor from 9,000 years ago, prior to the invention of agriculture. It was a meager, tough plant, barely recognizable from its modern form, with tiny, widely spaced kernels. Now consider the carrots, the eggplants, the watermelons, the bananas we consume. Almost all the fruits and vegetables available to us today, even those labeled organic and sold in artisanal markets, are the direct result of thousands of years of our deliberate, relentless selective breeding. Are they natural, then? They are products of human intervention, genetically modified by generations of farmers long before the advent of modern genetic engineering techniques. Agriculture itself is, in essence, a vast, global program of genetic modification, refined over millennia, bending nature to our will. As the Russian-Soviet biologist and plant breeder Ivan Vladimirovich Michurin famously stated, "We cannot wait for favors from nature. Our task is to take them from her." The very idea of an untouched, benevolent naturalness is often a romanticized fiction, contradicted by millennia of human history. Our domesticated animals, from dogs to cattle, are likewise products of intense artificial selection, genetically distinct from their wild ancestors. We build artificial environments, develop medicines, and constantly seek to control and manipulate our surroundings. It is an inherent human drive. Imagine, if you would, contracting a severe bacterial infection. What would you choose? To be treated as humanity might have been tens of thousands of years ago, with foraged herbs and ancient rituals, relying on luck and a fragile immune system. Or would you opt for antibiotics, a product of rigorous scientific intervention, which possess the demonstrable power to save your life? A triumph of human ingenuity over natural pathogens. We all carry deeply ingrained, often unquestioned, assumptions about what we deem natural, even though, in reality, the vast majority of our modern existence bears little resemblance to anything truly natural. For millennia, humanity has aggressively reshaped its surrounding environment, not out of malice, but out of necessity and ambition. And why? Because there is no inherent harmony with nature in the sentimental sense. While we are undeniably a part of nature, from our very inception, nature has consistently, relentlessly, attempted to extinguish us through disease, predators, and harsh environmental conditions. If you were to be transported back in time, say 100,000 years, you would instantly confront any number of creatures, diseases, or environmental hazards capable of swiftly ending your existence. From a purely physical strength perspective, we are a relatively weak species, yet our extended phenotype, our tools, our weapons, our collective intelligence, our ability to modify our environment, transformed humanity into the ultimate super predator on this planet. The relative safety and comfort of our modern habitat is, in large part, our own doing, a testament to our capacity to unite, innovate, and in many ways, defiantly challenge the natural order. So, despite the initial protests and the disapproving gazes that greeted Louise Brown's birth in 1978, IVF technology has not only endured, but flourished, becoming a mainstream medical procedure. Since then, over 8 million children have been born through IVF, exhibiting no discernible physical deviations from their naturally conceived peers. In the United States, approximately 1.5% of all births now occur via IVF, integrating it into the fabric of modern reproduction. In Japan, that figure approaches 5%, reflecting a growing acceptance and reliance on these advanced reproductive technologies. Before I elaborate on the profound implications of this, I want to emphasize a crucial point. IVF, in its current iteration, is a complex, often physically demanding, and expensive procedure, and its success rates, while improving, are not yet perfect. It involves hormone injections, egg retrieval, laboratory fertilization, and embryo transfer, all of which carry physical, emotional, and financial burdens. But here is the critical pivot. As soon as this situation changes, as soon as IVF becomes a simpler, less invasive, more affordable, and dramatically more effective procedure, perhaps through automated systems or less demanding protocols, the societal perception will undergo a radical shift. Parents who choose to conceive children through the traditional, standard method rather than through IVF will be regarded with increasingly severe condemnation. They will be judged for their perceived irresponsibility, much in the same way that parents who refuse to vaccinate their children are viewed with profound societal disapproval today, accused of neglecting their child's well-being. The moral landscape shifts dramatically when a better option becomes readily available, and here is why. In 1990, a mere 12 years after Louise Brown's birth, medical scientists achieved a new milestone. They successfully developed techniques to safely examine a human embryo prior to implantation, conducting tests for certain genetic diseases. This type of screening became known as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD. What this meant was that from the several embryos typically generated during an IVF cycle, it became possible to analyze their DNA for potential unpleasant surprises, specifically the presence of various genetic disorders. This involves a delicate biopsy of a few cells from the early embryo, usually at the blastocyst stage, which are then genetically analyzed. Following this analysis, parents could then select and implant only those embryos that were free from obvious genetic problems, thereby avoiding the transmission of severe hereditary conditions. The benefits, at face value, are undeniable, offering parents the profound ability to mitigate inherited suffering. But where does one draw the line between preventing a devastating disease and actively enhancing desirable physical or cognitive characteristics? This is the core ethical dilemma, the fundamental slippery slope. If we possess the ability to screen out embryos predisposed to congenital muscular dystrophy, a debilitating disease, why would we not also be able to select an embryo, for instance, with a genetic predisposition for easily building muscle mass, or for exceptional cardiovascular health, or even for superior cognitive function? The boundary between therapy and enhancement is not just blurry, it is, in many ways, arbitrary, a construct of our current moral sensitivities. And we are almost certainly destined to cross this threshold. Indeed, some have already stepped across it. Consider, for example, the websites of clinics in the United States that openly offer IVF with screening services, not only to exclude certain genetic pathologies, but also simply to allow prospective parents to choose the sex of their future child. This is a clear case of enhancement driven by personal preference rather than medical necessity. And this, I assure you, is merely the beginning. Far more intriguing and considerably stranger services are emerging. How does this sound? For parents who themselves live with conditions such as dwarfism or deafness, some clinics now provide the option to select embryos that carry the very genetic markers for dwarfism or deafness. Is this ethical? The question is fraught with complexity, sparking fervent debates. For some, it is a profound affirmation of identity, a way to ensure their child shares their unique experience and culture, such as in certain deaf communities, where deafness is not seen as a disability, but a distinct way of being. For others, it is a disturbing rejection of the ability to prevent what most would consider an impairment, a deliberate choice to perpetuate a condition that could otherwise be avoided. But the fact remains, these services exist, challenging our preconceived notions of health and normalcy. Let us turn our attention to Down syndrome. Children born with Down syndrome possess an additional copy of chromosome 21, which can lead to various health challenges, including heart defects, developmental delays, and cognitive impairments of varying degrees. It also increases their risk for certain cancers and generally reduces life expectancy. Yet, many individuals with Down syndrome grow into happy, socially integrated people who bring immense joy and make meaningful contributions to the lives of those around them and to society at large. Many parents, siblings, spouses, and friends of individuals with Down syndrome often regard them as a profound blessing, enriching their lives in unexpected ways. But here is what is particularly telling. Beginning in the 2000s, doctors in Iceland were mandated to inform expectant mothers about the availability of screening tests fully covered by the national healthcare system that could, with a high degree of accuracy, determine whether their child would have Down syndrome or other genetic conditions. Over the course of a decade following the introduction of these tests, virtually every woman who received a positive result for Down syndrome chose to terminate the pregnancy. The pattern is replicated across the developed world: Australia, China, Denmark, the United Kingdom. The story is much the same, with abortion rates for Down syndrome diagnoses reaching 90 to 98%. This high rate reflects not necessarily a lack of love for children with Down syndrome, but often profound societal pressures, the immense challenges of raising a child with special needs, and the widespread desire to prevent suffering. Perhaps the most revealing example comes from the United States, a nation perpetually embroiled in passionate religious and ethical debates surrounding abortion. A 2007 survey revealed that only 20% of Americans believed parents should have the right to terminate a pregnancy if the fetus had a serious but non-fatal genetic anomaly or disease, such as Down syndrome. This reflects a strong moral opposition to abortion in the abstract. Yet, when faced with an actual diagnosis of Down syndrome, a staggering 67% of American parents chose abortion. We're discussing here the morally agonizing decision of abortion, a choice weighed with immense personal anguish and profound implications. Now, imagine what will occur when parents merely need to point to one of 15 embryos on a glass slide and declare which one they wish to implant, without the emotional and physical trauma of an abortion. The disparity between abstract moral pronouncements and actual decisions when confronted with biological realities is stark. It suggests that lofty moral values are often easiest to espouse when they do not demand difficult, immediate action or personal sacrifice. This also raises questions about the future acceptance of genetic differences and the potential for a society that increasingly screens out any deviations from a perceived optimal norm. So, if we are comfortable rejecting embryos that would develop into a child with Down syndrome, motivated perhaps by the belief that such children might experience greater unhappiness or hardship, or by the immense practical demands of their care, then why, by the same logic, should we not be able to select an embryo with genes that potentially ensure a maximally happy life? For instance, an embryo with genes linked to a high IQ. As I've discussed, research consistently indicates a strong correlation between higher IQ and increased life expectancy, higher income levels, and, crucially, greater reported happiness and overall life satisfaction. What parent, knowing that such vital life indicators correlate with IQ, would not desire their child's IQ to be as high as genetically possible? This becomes not just a matter of enhancing, but of optimizing for well-being. And the follow-up question naturally arises. How high is as high as possible, and how might we achieve it? To properly explore this, we must begin with a somewhat unexpected subject, the chicken. Specifically, the gallus, the wild jungle fowl from which our domesticated chickens descended. The gallus, in its natural state, was capable of laying perhaps 1 egg per month, at most, a meager output limited by its wild existence. But then, humanity intervened. Through thousands of years of what was, initially, quite rudimentary and unsophisticated selective breeding, choosing the largest, most productive hens and roosters, we have arrived at our modern hens, capable of laying up to 300 eggs per year. That is an astonishing 25-fold increase in productivity, a testament to the power of directed selection over time. The fundamental insight here is this: hacking biology is far simpler than it intuitively appears. And we understand this at a primal, intuitive level, because all the complex life forms surrounding us, including ourselves, descended from a single common ancestor. This shared evolutionary heritage means that the underlying mechanisms of life are often conserved and therefore manipulable. The example of the chicken demonstrates beyond doubt that our biology can be profoundly manipulated, even through relatively primitive selective breeding, and to a far greater extent than we might initially imagine. We are not immune to these forces of selection, whether natural or artificial. Many people tend to view humanity as the pinnacle of nature, with nothing above us but the heavens and the stars, assuming a fixed, immutable human form. Yet, we have absolutely no basis to assume that, in this fundamental biological sense, humans are any different from chickens in their susceptibility to genetic modification and selection. We possess the capacity to profoundly improve ourselves, to enhance our traits and capabilities, just as we can inadvertently degrade ourselves through poor choices or unforeseen consequences. Both outcomes could occur remarkably quickly, in historical terms. This is a crucial consideration, especially when we recall the powerful influence of negative selection pressures in modern society, where advances in medicine and technology can sometimes allow traits that were once maladaptive to persist, or even proliferate, which I've explored in previous monologues. However, the problem and the beauty of human complexity is that we cannot simply breed humans with specific characteristics, as we did with chickens, for a myriad of deeply ingrained societal, ethical, and practical reasons. The very notion evokes dark historical echoes of eugenics and social stratification. But even if our societal morality were to permit such a practice, a significant practical challenge remains: time. The human life cycle differs dramatically from that of a chicken. To create humans with certain desirable qualities through traditional breeding would require an immensely greater number of generations to produce offspring. In developed nations, on average, a human requires about 28 years from birth to procreate, whereas a chicken, anywhere in the world, can reproduce in approximately 6 months. This fundamental difference in generation time is the primary reason why genetic changes accumulate and become apparent much faster in rapidly reproducing animals than in slow reproducing species like humans. Evolution is a slow grinding process dependent on vast stretches of time and countless cycles of reproduction. But what if I were to suggest that we could drastically shorten the human reproductive cycle, bringing it down to a mere 6 months, much like that of a chicken? The number of sperm a man can produce is, for all practical purposes, almost limitless, an endless supply of genetic potential. However, the number of eggs we can retrieve from a single woman during an IVF procedure is strictly limited, typically to 10 or 15, a precious and finite resource. Consequently, parents, at present, can only select from a maximum of 10 to 15 embryos. What if we could multiply this number by orders of magnitude, dramatically increasing the quantity of eggs available for IVF? We cannot, of course, harvest an unlimited number of eggs directly from women without extreme risk and ethical concerns. But this becomes unnecessary because here, stem cells come to our aid. Stem cells are remarkable, pluripotent cells, meaning they possess the astonishing ability to differentiate and become almost any other type of cell in the body. Imagine taking readily available cells, perhaps from a simple blood sample or a skin biopsy, and reprogramming them into induced pluripotent stem cells. These stem cells could then be guided through sophisticated laboratory protocols to develop into fully functional egg cells or sperm cells. This breakthrough bypasses the natural limitations of the human reproductive cycle. Not if, but when this process becomes entirely safe, efficient, and routinely applicable for human use, women undergoing IVF will no longer be limited to fertilizing 10 or 15 of their natural eggs. They will be able to generate and fertilize hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of egg cells derived from their own stem cells. Instead of screening a meager handful of embryos, prospective parents will have the unprecedented power to analyze hundreds, even thousands, selecting only the very best, the most genetically optimal. This dramatically increases the odds of finding an embryo free of disease and possessing desired enhancements. This technology also opens the door to creating gametes from individuals who are infertile or postmenopausal, further expanding reproductive possibilities. Yes, I understand that this prospect may sound unsettling, even horrifying to some. It conjures images of assembly line humanity, of children chosen from a catalog, but it is profoundly unlikely that our species will ever collectively reject a technology capable of eradicating horrific diseases, dramatically improving our health, and substantially increasing our lifespan. Despite any perceived drawbacks or ethical qualms, humanity has consistently embraced technologies that promise to alleviate suffering and enhance our lives, whether they be explosives, atomic energy, anabolic steroids, or plastic surgery. The allure of a healthier, longer, more capable life is a powerful, almost irresistible driver of human action. With embryo screening, our innate drive to eliminate genetic diseases will compel us to act as swiftly as possible, and in the medium term, to begin altering and improving other human capabilities. Perhaps in the distant future, we will even be preparing ourselves for life on a warmer Earth, or in the challenging environments of space, or on other planets, by genetically engineering adaptations to extreme conditions. This is the scenario that could, potentially, mark the effective end of sexual reproduction for the purpose of conception, or at least its significant marginalization. Because who, in a future where such technology is commonplace and accessible, safe and affordable, would willingly gamble with the genetic lottery of their child's future? Who would choose to play Russian roulette with their offspring's genes when a precise, predictable alternative exists? Who would risk not undergoing a safe and expensive procedure to ensure their child inherits the most robust, advantageous combination of their and their partner's genes, free from known vulnerabilities? How many individuals would be willing to watch a neighbor's child succumb to a preventable genetic disease and not hold the parents accountable for their choice to forego available technology? The moral calculus will shift dramatically, placing the onus on parents to justify not enhancing their children. And once we have meticulously screened out all embryos carrying genetic diseases, eliminated those with elevated risks for cancer and diabetes, and discarded those with genes correlated with depression, schizophrenia, or psychosis. After all of these critical selections aimed at preventing suffering and ensuring health, would you not then almost instinctively point to the embryo possessing characteristics correlated with the healthiest and longest life, perhaps even to an embryo with genes associated with? The logical progression from disease prevention to enhancement for well-being seems almost inevitable. The question becomes not, variable do this, but when, and to what extent. What parent, knowing that such vital life indicators correlate with IQ, would not desire their child's IQ to be as high as genetically possible? This becomes not just a matter of enhancing, but of optimizing for well-being, for a life of greater opportunity and fulfillment. And the follow-up question naturally arises: how high is as high as possible, and how might we achieve it? Some might argue that such precise prediction of genes responsible for IQ is utopian, perhaps even impossible. The reality is that, like genes determining height, the genetic architecture of intelligence is incredibly complex, involving a vast number of contributing genes, each with a small effect. For height alone, approximately 800 distinct genes have been identified to influence it in some way. And while the complete list of genetic determinants for height is still being elucidated, Stephen Hsieh, a theoretical physicist and vice president for research at Michigan State University, has conducted groundbreaking work demonstrating how, using 20 currently known genetic factors, one can predict a person's future height with astonishing accuracy. Hsieh's team utilized genomic data from 500,000 individuals within the UK Biobank to predict adult height based solely on genetic information. They then compared these predictions to the actual measured height of the individuals. The margin of error was remarkably small, no more than 2.5 centimeters, or approximately 1 inch. Yes, we can predict a person's height with a plus or minus 2.5 centimeter accuracy just by examining their DNA, a feat that would have seemed like science fiction a few decades ago. Now tell me, why would this not eventually hold true for intelligence and for almost every other complex human trait? The argument often raised is that intelligence is a more abstract concept, inherently more difficult to define and measure, unlike a physical attribute like height. I would agree, but the fact that something is more difficult certainly does not mean it is impossible. The complexity is a challenge to be overcome, not an insurmountable barrier. Currently, we have identified only about 200 genes that are, in some way, correlated with above-average intelligence. And each of these identified genes accounts for only a tiny fraction of the total variability in human IQ. Many of these are common variants found in a significant portion of the population, each contributing a very small positive or negative effect to cognitive function. Broadly speaking, the few hundred genes we have thus far discovered, out of the thousands potentially influencing intellectual development, tell us relatively little about the full cognitive capabilities of any abstract or real person. The full genomic picture remains elusive. And yet the sheer speed with which we have been able to identify even these few genes, especially considering our relatively early stage of genetic understanding, strongly suggests our capacity to uncover many, many more. The pace of discovery is accelerating exponentially. The Nobel laureate in physics, Hans Bethe, once remarked, "I always considered John von Neumann, with his brain, to belong to some other species." He saw von Neumann as a clear example of human evolution in action, an outlier so profound he almost transcended humanity. And it's hardly surprising. Consider the sheer breadth and depth of von Neumann's accomplishments in mathematics, physics, computer science, and economics. Just briefly surveying his legacy is enough to elicit a sense of bewildered awe. The American mathematician Hermann Goldstein, who worked closely with von Neumann, wrote that one of von Neumann's remarkable abilities was his capacity for total recall. As far as I could tell, von Neumann was able, having read a book or article, to quote it back verbatim. Furthermore, he could do it years later without hesitation. He could also translate it without loss of speed from the original language into English, simultaneously processing and articulating complex ideas. Goldstein once tested this ability, asking von Neumann to recall the opening of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. Without a moment's pause, von Neumann immediately began to recite the entire first chapter, continuing uninterrupted for 10 or 15 minutes until he was asked to stop. Such a mind is almost beyond our comprehension, operating at a level that seems fundamentally different from our own. In their seminal philosophical paper, Embryo Selection for Cognitive Enhancement, Curiosity or a Way to Game the System, Oxford professors Carl Schulman and Nick Bostrom attempt to quantify the extent to which human intelligence could be enhanced through precisely this kind of embryo selection. According to Schulman and Bostrom's calculations, the average difference between the highest and lowest IQ scores in a sample of 15 embryos, a typical number resulting from a single IVF cycle using gametes from the same biological parents, is approximately 12 points. This natural variation already provides a degree of choice. However, if we were to harness the power of stem cells to generate a pool of 100 embryos, instead of 10 or 15, the average difference between the highest and lowest IQs among them would expand to about 20 points. And if we could generate 1,000 embryos for selection, the average difference in IQ between the highest and lowest would increase to roughly 25 points on the IQ scale. While 25 points might seem like a modest gain when spread across 1,000 embryos, this average difference, over the course of a lifetime, can account for vastly different life experiences and opportunities, including educational attainment, career paths, and problem-solving abilities. It represents a significant shift in potential, and yet this is not the ultimate potential you came here to explore, is it? You are interested in the truly astronomical IQ scores, the limits of what we might theoretically achieve. For that, we would need to engage in an almost unthinkable practice, recursively breeding embryos with the most desirable characteristics among themselves. Yes, you heard me correctly. I said breeding human embryos among themselves. The very idea, as you consider it now, might sound like something ripped from the pages of a dystopian science fiction novel, evoking unsettling images of human farms and genetic manipulation run amok. But fundamentally, there are no principled biological limitations preventing such a process from a purely scientific standpoint, only profound ethical and societal barriers. The process outlined by Jamie Metzl, while deeply unsettling on paper, is conceptually rather straightforward, building upon the principles we've already discussed. Imagine two parents who have undergone the entire IVF procedure I've just described, including comprehensive genetic screening. From a pool of 1,000 embryos, they have meticulously selected the single best one, possessing the most promising genetic predispositions for a high IQ, perhaps an embryo with a predicted IQ of 125, which is already above average. But now, instead of implanting this embryo into the mother's womb to be born, they instead allow it to develop slightly in vitro. From this developing embryo, they extract a few cells. These cells are then used to create new gametes, new sperm and egg cells, using the same stem cell reprogramming techniques that transform the mother's blood cells into eggs in the first place. This creates a new generation of gametes, effectively from a nascent human with a superior genetic profile. Now imagine another pair of parents who have gone through the identical process, selecting their own genetically superior embryo. From their best embryo, we derive new sperm cells, or egg cells, depending on the initial sex of the chosen embryo. If we then use the sperm from the second embryo to fertilize the egg cells derived from the first embryo, these two chosen embryos effectively become the asterisk biological parents of their offspring. The original father and mother of the first embryo and the father and mother of the second would then effectively become the biological grandparents of this new second-generation embryo. This grandchild embryo, now carrying an even more concentrated set of desirable genes, can then in turn be bred with an embryo from another set of ancestral parents, making the original parents now biological great-grandparents. Theoretically, this process could continue almost indefinitely, recursively, through many generations of in vitro breeding until an embryo, the product of multiple generations of meticulously selected breeding and genetic concentration, is finally implanted into a surrogate mother for gestation and brought to term. The not insignificant nuance, and a deeply uncomfortable one for many, is that the child born would not truly be the direct child of the individuals who initiated the process, but rather the highly optimized offspring of their genetically selected grandchildren or further descendants. They would be more akin to ancestors or designers than traditional parents, making a profound break with our established understanding of lineage and family. Would many agree to such a profound redefinition of parenthood, to relinquish direct genetic connection for the sake of optimization? While certainly not everyone, it is equally certain that some individuals, driven by ambition, scientific curiosity, or a desire for the best child, would, by recursively breeding embryos in this manner, instead of progressing through, say, 3.5 human generations per century through natural reproduction, we could potentially cycle through 200 generations within the same time frame. To put that into perspective, stepping back 200 human generations through natural means would take us back to roughly the point in history when the wheel was invented, a time of fundamental human change. By repeatedly selecting and breeding embryos with the most desirable sets of, let us call them intellectual genes, we could, in effect, create a new breed of humans, much like our super-fertile chickens, but instead, super-intelligent, fundamentally altering the cognitive landscape of our species. So the tantalizing question remains, what kind of IQ could we achieve through such a process? When we delve into the mathematics of recursively breeding these meticulously selected embryos, the resulting figures become truly astounding. According to Schulman and Bostrom's calculations, just 5 generations of this recursive embryo selection, starting with groups of 10 embryos and selecting for the highest IQ, could lead to an increase in average IQ of approximately 65 points. To help you fully grasp the significance of a 65-point IQ difference, let me clarify. The average human IQ is typically set at 100 points, encompassing the vast majority of the population. An IQ of 100 plus 65, which is 165, represents an extraordinarily high level of intelligence. It is often said, though I must stress this is anecdotal and difficult to verify, that Albert Einstein possessed an IQ of around 160. Let me pause here and emphasize this point. It is often said, but there is no definitive, confirmed evidence of Einstein's exact IQ from a standardized test. Nevertheless, it serves as a cultural benchmark for exceptional intellect. Continuing then, the difference between an average person and a conventionally recognized genius is roughly that 65-point span. To truly underline the scale, consider this. The difference in IQ between an average person and someone with an IQ of 165, a level associated with genius, is asterisk the same as the difference between an average person and someone with a severe form of intellectual disability requiring constant care. That is the profound impact of a 65-point IQ difference. Such an individual would operate on a fundamentally different cognitive plane, capable of abstract thought, complex problem-solving, and rapid learning that would leave most of us bewildered. And this, remember, is achievable in just 5 generations. What about 10 generations? Schulman and Bostrom suggest that after 10 generations of this recursive selection, the average increase could reach an astonishing 130 points. A 130-point difference separates an average person from someone like Terence Tao, whose IQ is said to be around 230 points, and who is often hailed as a mathematical Mozart. Tao is so brilliant, so far beyond conventional understanding, that I, for instance, would struggle to even explain to myself, let alone to you, why he is considered so exceptional. The mere fact that he demonstrated a probabilistic enhancement of the Zemeridi regularity lemma, or that he proved a popular law in the theory of random matrices, are to me just an inscrutable jumble of highly specialized terms, the language of a mind operating at an entirely different frequency. All that most of us can truly grasp and marvel at is the fact that he was attending university-level mathematics courses at the tender age of 9. Or consider this quote from Princeton University mathematics professor Charles Pfefferman, published in New Scientist, describing Tao's abilities. Tao's reputation is such that mathematicians now vie for his attention to their problems. He's becoming a sort of lifeline for exhausted researchers. If you are stuck on a difficult mathematical problem, the clear path to a solution, it seems, is to pique Terence Tao's interest. His mind is a bridge to solutions that elude all others, a truly unique cognitive phenomenon. An IQ of 230 is not merely high. It is, for individuals like us, literally inconceivable. It represents a level of cognitive power that could revolutionize every field of human endeavor. However, the American physicist Stephen Shu, whom I mentioned earlier in the context of predicting height from genotype, holds an even more optimistic view of this potential leap in human development. He believes that within 10 years, we will likely have deciphered the majority of genes influencing intelligence, moving beyond mere correlation to a deeper understanding of causation. Consequently, he speculates that in the future, we could potentially create, quote, super-intelligent humans with IQs approaching 1,000. Of course, no one currently has any real conception of what an IQ of 1,000 might even from mean. The scale itself might break down at such extreme levels. However, we can be confident that whatever it signifies, abilities of this magnitude would vastly exceed the maximum intellectual capacity ever observed among the approximately 100 billion people who have ever lived on this planet. Metzl envisions a future where we could witness individuals with truly extraordinary intellectual capacities, manifesting simultaneously and at their absolute peak, perfect recall of language and images, super-fast thought processes and computational ability, brilliant visualization of geometric space and even higher dimensions, the capacity for multi-layered analysis and parallel contemplation, an intuitive grasp of complex systems, and a list of other unparalleled cognitive attributes that would continue almost indefinitely, making them seem. On the other hand, evolution is a process rich in alternatives, defensive mechanisms, and compromises. The human brain, a product of this intricate, often messy, evolutionary process, is a delicately balanced system. A human with a genetically modified IQ of 1,000 points might just as easily descend into madness, become a dangerously unstable psychopath, or develop an entirely unknown neurological disorder, a catastrophic side effect of pushing the boundaries of what is naturally possible. The sheer energy demands of such a brain could be crippling, or its enhanced sensory processing overwhelming. Furthermore, it would be even more challenging to identify which detrimental mutations might be silently accumulating and passing down through generations of recursively bred embryos, only to manifest tragically upon the birth of a living child. The complexity of gene-gene interactions, or pleiotropy, where one gene affects multiple traits, means that optimizing for one desirable trait could inadvertently sabotage another, or unleash unforeseen pathologies. And naturally, the creation of such superintelligent individuals would profoundly impact social and ethical structures, potentially creating a new form of genetic aristocracy and shaking the very foundations of human equality and justice. The concept of designer parents creating designer children raises deep questions about the dignity of human life and the right to an unmanipulated genome. If this entire narrative involving the cultivation of stem cells and their subsequent development into gametes sounds like some fantastical, drug-fueled hallucination, then I assure you, appearances can be deceiving. The underlying technology already exists, and it functions in ways that are, at times, astonishingly unexpected, pushing the boundaries of biological possibility. Recently, Chinese scientists announced a remarkable achievement. They successfully harvested stem cells from mouse egg cells. These stem cells were then matured into, and pay careful attention to this, sperm cells. These lab-grown sperm cells were subsequently used to fertilize egg cells from another female mouse. The result? Healthy offspring, carrying half of their genetic material from the first mother, who provided the initial egg for stem cells, and half from the second mother, who provided the egg for fertilization. Similarly, American scientists have already achieved viable offspring from 2 male mice using a comparable method by taking somatic cells from one male, converting them to induced pluripotent stem cells, then coaxing them into becoming egg cells, which were then fertilized by sperm from another male. While the application of this technology to humans is still a distant prospect, fraught with technical hurdles and ethical dilemmas, the fundamental principle is proven and actively working in the laboratory. The implications for creating fully viable children through these methods are, to say the least, profound. But what further ignites the imagination is the even more radical possibility. Both the egg and the sperm could potentially be derived from the same descendant individual. Imagine a single person becoming both the genetic father and the genetic mother of a child, essentially creating a genetic clone, but with the possibility for engineered diversity. This form of asexual reproduction, if perfected, would revolutionize our understanding of parenthood and lineage. Have you noticed something truly extraordinary amidst all these seemingly bizarre methods of hacking human reproduction? Regardless of how strange or technologically advanced these processes appear, any child born through such means would still possess 100% unaltered, pristine, untouched human DNA, in the sense that the asterisk sequence of bases would be naturally derived. We are not yet talking about PS editing the genes of these designer offspring directly using CRISPR. We are still operating within the realm of selecting the asterisk's best natural combinations of existing human genes, albeit through radically accelerated and manipulated reproductive cycles. The initial genetic material still originates from existing human genomes, simply rearranged and optimally chosen. Despite all our differences, our varied skin tones, languages, and cultures, we are, genetically speaking, remarkably similar to one another. Indeed, a study led by Oxford University revealed that groups of chimpanzees in Central Africa exhibit greater genetic diversity among themselves than all the human populations living on different continents combined. This is a truly astounding finding, underscoring our relative genetic homogeneity. One crucial reason for this striking lack of human genetic diversity lies in the repeated near extinctions our ancestors faced throughout history, periods known as bottlenecks. Genetic analysis suggests that approximately 1.2 million years ago, the population of our ancestors dwindled to a mere 26,000 individuals, a perilously small number for a species. Then, about 150,000 years ago, human numbers may have plunged to only around 600 individuals, teetering on the very brink of survival in southern Africa, a population equivalent to a very small village. And yet again, 70,000 years ago, when volcanic ash from the Sumatran supereruption obscured the sun for 6 long years, causing a, quote, volcanic winter, the total human population plummeted to just a few thousand souls, perhaps as few as 2,000. What is 70,000 years in the grand conservative sweep of evolution? Not very much at all. This series of bottlenecks drastically reduced our genetic diversity, leaving us all remarkably alike under the surface, making us in some ways more vulnerable than other species. Directly editing the human genome, for example, via CRISPR-Cas9, carries an enormous number of inherent dangers. Even if we could flawlessly and unerringly cut and replace sections of biological code, achieving perfect precision in terms of sequence, we might inadvertently remove or alter a gene whose crucial importance we do not yet fully comprehend. The human genome is not a simple linear code. It is a complex, three-dimensional structure with intricate regulatory networks, epigenetics, and non-coding regions that play vital roles. The consequences of such an action might not be immediately apparent. They could manifest later in life, perhaps in subtle disease predispositions, or even appear only in subsequent generations, an unforeseen biological time bomb. This is precisely why, for instance, an innovative Canadian company is now combining artificial intelligence with genomics, striving to identify complex patterns in disease manifestation. As their representatives articulate, the future of medicine will rely almost entirely on artificial intelligence, because the intricate web of human biology, with its millions of interacting parts and complex pathways, is simply too complex for the human mind alone to fully grasp, even for the most brilliant scientists. So do you understand the core challenge? We currently lack, and are unlikely to acquire anytime soon, a complete, holistic understanding of what every specific gene does, and how it interacts within the vast, interconnected network of the human genome. The concept of a gene itself has become far more complex than the simple Mendelian unit of inheritance envisioned a century ago. Rex Young, a geneticist at the Whitehead Institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, notes that when he first began teaching as a young professor 2 decades ago, it took him only about 2 hours to explain to novice students what a gene was and how it worked. Today, he and his colleagues require 3 months of lectures to convey the contemporary understanding of the gene concept. And this is not because students have become less capable, but because our scientific understanding of genes has exploded, revealing layers of complexity, including regulatory elements, non-coding DNA, alternative splicing, and long-range interactions that make the genome a dynamic, rather than static, entity. All we can do, at present, is to observe patterns and correlations between genes and certain traits, typically by analyzing very large, often gigantic data sets. For example, we might compare the genomes of individuals suffering from schizophrenia with a large, carefully matched sample of healthy individuals of the same sex, age, and background. We then look for specific differences in their genetic code. The task of fully understanding the myriad functions of each gene and its complex interplay with every other gene is incredibly daunting, a profound black box problem. Therefore, we do not yet fully comprehend how to perform significant genetic modifications on complex traits without inadvertently causing unintended harm to other parts of the genome, disrupting delicate balances we don't fully perceive. But if all of this is merely too very difficult, rather than infinitely impossible asterisk, that a time will inevitably come when the sophistication of our tools surpasses the complexity of our biology. Our instruments of manipulation will eventually catch up with the intricate design of life itself. On the other hand, it is equally certain that humanity will not simply await this perfect understanding before acting. The very idea of modifying our genes demands the utmost degree of circumspection and careful deliberation. But we would be an entirely different species if our actions were guided primarily by prudence rather than by ambition, by caution rather than by the irresistible urge to push boundaries. Just as we lacked perfect knowledge about fire before humans began to harness it, or about atomic energy before we unleashed its power, or about cancer before we attempted to treat it, or about domesticated crops before we began to cultivate and consume them. In each instance, we sought a balance between the pros and cons, and we pushed forward, driven by an insatiable curiosity and an unwavering pursuit of new knowledge and discoveries. Genetic technologies, far from being an exception, will undoubtedly follow this established pattern, driven by the profound human desire to overcome limitations and improve our condition. From existing examples in nature, we know with certainty that genetic modification holds the potential to grant us biological immortality, like the Hydra, a creature capable of seemingly indefinite self-renewal. Keen eyesight, like an eagle, with its extraordinary visual acuity, the strength of a gorilla with its immense muscular power, or even the astonishing ability to perceive in 16 dimensions, like the mantis shrimp, which possesses a complex visual system far beyond our own, and which I explored in a previous monologue about unseen infinities. And undoubtedly, there are countless other capabilities we cannot even yet imagine, latent in the genetic code of life, waiting to be discovered and perhaps transferred. What would it mean for humanity to shed the constraints of aging, to possess the sensory abilities of different species, or to experience the physical prowess of the wild? These questions move beyond mere enhancement to a redefinition of human nature itself. You might argue, I don't want this, I won't participate, it's unethical. And it's wrong to make such decisions for an unborn child. Firstly, it is possible to do so, and we, as a species, constantly make such decisions, both large and small, that profoundly impact future generations. And secondly, there are many who will most certainly not echo your sentiment. The pressures of a competitive world, the desire for advantage, will be a powerful driver. Consider this. In 2006, the South Korean government imposed a 10 p.m. curfew on intense, after-hours cram schools due to the alarming rate at which many children were becoming chronically exhausted, often studying until the early hours of the morning under the unrelenting pressure of their parents. This wasn't just about academic success. It was about securing a place in a fiercely competitive society where educational achievement is seen as the primary pathway to a good life. Despite the government's efforts to alleviate this intense pressure on children, an arms race in education continues unabated in South Korea, driven by deeply ingrained cultural values of diligence and achievement. Beyond academics, physical beauty is prized universally, But South Korea has elevated the cult of beauty to an entirely new level, intertwining it deeply with social and professional success. By some estimates, the country boasts the highest per capita rate of plastic surgery in the world. According to a BBC poll, approximately half of all South Korean women between the ages of 20 and 30 have undergone some form of plastic surgery, a striking indicator of the societal value placed on physical perfection. It is common practice for South Korean parents to gift plastic surgery procedures to their children as a graduation present, a tangible investment in their future. Here is a telling quote from an interview with a South Korean college student published in the New Yorker magazine. "All the girls get plastic surgery at 19, so if you don't do it, then in a few years all your friends will look better, and you'll look like a degraded version of yourself." This reveals the immense social pressure, the fear of being left behind, of failing to conform to an ever-rising standard. Do you honestly believe that in a country with such deeply ingrained cultural values, such intense competition, and such a strong drive for enhancement, genetic modifications would not be embraced immediately, as soon as they become safely and widely available? Do you truly believe that the pressure to give one's child every possible advantage would be immense? And what about the moment your child, in the future, looks at you and understands that you had the power to make them smarter, taller, more resilient, perhaps even more beautiful, but you chose not to, adhering to an outdated notion of naturalness? Would they thank you, or would they feel disadvantaged, even resentful? Even if you were to adamantly cling to the principle of naturalness for your descendants, it might ultimately prove futile. Because individuals with superior genetic characteristics, whether naturally occurring or artificially enhanced, will, without question, experience greater reproductive success and consequently produce a larger number of offspring. This is the relentless logic of evolution. Consider the proliferation of blue-eyed individuals across the globe. Observe their sheer numbers, and then reflect on the fact that all of them share a single common ancestor who lived a mere 8,000 years ago. The genes responsible for blue eyes clearly experienced an astounding, resounding reproductive success. While various hypotheses exist, the predominant theory suggests that blue eyes were simply perceived as extraordinarily attractive by potential mates, giving those individuals a reproductive edge. A seemingly minor aesthetic trait led to a massive genetic expansion. Now, imagine your natural descendants navigating a world populated by, let's say, extremely beautiful and supremely intelligent individuals, enhanced through genetic means. Would your descendants have any significant chance of reproductive success in such a landscape? And with each passing generation, those chances would diminish further and further, as the enhanced population outcompetes and outreproduces the unenhanced. But in the grand scheme, perhaps this is not the most important consideration. Ponder this: the more genetic modifications you introduce into your child, the less, from a purely biological standpoint, that child is truly your child. They become a product of design, a crafted entity. Genetically modified children in this advanced future will not have parents in the traditional sense. They will have designers. This makes a profound break with our established understanding of lineage, biological kinship, and the very concept of identity. This becomes even more starkly evident with research projects like GP Right. GP Right is an ambitious project aimed at raising $100 million to synthesize an entire human genome from scratch, nucleotide by nucleotide, beginning by synthesizing the genomes of simpler organisms and progressively advancing in complexity towards the creation of a complete, artificial human genetic code. Do you grasp the profound difference between this and CRISPR? It is akin to the distinction between editing an existing book and writing a book from its very inception. CRISPR allows us to modify existing text, GP Wright aims to write the entire operating system from the ground up. We will literally possess the ability to create life, not merely to tweak it. This shifts humanity from being a product of evolution to being a conscious creator, with all the responsibility and peril that entails. Consider the popular 1997 film Gattaca. In its narrative, a young man genetically unmodified is denied his aspiration to become an astronaut based on his genetic profile, deemed invalid for the rigorous demands of space travel due to inherent predispositions. Society in Gattaca is divided into valids, genetically engineered, and invalids, naturally born. Ultimately, the protagonist manages to reach space through sheer perseverance, cleverness, and wit, overcoming his genetic limitations through sheer force of will. But realistically, would a future society truly be willing to dispatch a genetically unenhanced individual on a costly and dangerous space mission, risking both lives and resources, when genetically modified humans, better adapted to withstand radiation and capable of maintaining bone density in zero-gravity environments, are available? The film serves as a powerful allegory for the societal implications of genetic discrimination and the tension between innate talent and achieved excellence. While striving for a high degree of equality is immensely important, achieving absolute, perfect equality in all traits, especially biological ones, cannot, by its very nature, be the ultimate goal of human endeavor, nor is it a practical one when faced with the relentless drive for advancement. Consider the present day. Residents of villages in Bangladesh can now purchase affordable smartphones, and their rate of adoption is skyrocketing, connecting them to a global network of information and commerce. But if we had initially demanded perfectly equal access to smartphones for everyone on the planet, if technological progress had been held back by the imperative of immediate universal access, the smartphone industry would never have been able to innovate, scale production, and drive down prices to the point where they became accessible to the economically disadvantaged worldwide. Progress, unfortunately, often begins with the privileged few, or in specific advanced markets, before diffusing to the many. This creates an inherent tension between the desire for equality and the engine of technological innovation. Companies like Inscript are actively striving to make all the necessary tools for CRISPR technology readily available at the click of a mouse, decentralizing genetic engineering. Such companies, as The Economist observed in May 2018, are betting that biology will transform into a lucrative, computational platform, with DNA becoming its fundamental code and CRISPR evolving into its primary programming language. This isn't just a metaphor. It's a vision of a future where biological design is as accessible and programmable as software. Yes, we will play God. And we always have, in a sense, ever since we first domesticated plants and animals, ever since we started building dams and cities. Do you know why? Perhaps it is best to let Charles Darwin answer for me. He described nature as clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel. This is why. Because nature, in its raw form, is indifferent to suffering, and we, as conscious beings, recoil from suffering. And also because, as I have suggested, we are an incredibly ambitious, even arrogant, species. If a technology created, if a boundary can be pushed, it almost certainly will be created and pushed. And it will be Struce, humanity, not some external force who will be the first to wield it, for better or for worse. It is an intrinsic part of our drive to master our environment, including our own biology. Speaking of which, it is perhaps unsurprising that China has embarked upon the most aggressive path towards creating its own national gene pool on an industrial scale. Consider, for example, their recently announced program, a 15-year investment totaling $9 billion, explicitly aimed at establishing national leadership in the field of precision medicine. This isn't just about healthcare, it's about economic dominance, scientific prestige, and potentially military applications and social control. And, perhaps most tellingly, this plan also seeks to actively suppress similar programs across the globe, aiming for a singular global leadership position. The 13th Five-Year Plan for the Development of the Biotechnology Industry, formulated by China's National Development and Reform Commission, ambitiously targeted the sequencing of the genomes of at least 50% of all newborns by the year 2020. This monumental undertaking involved supporting hundreds of individual projects focused on genome sequencing and the collection of clinical data, often in collaboration with private companies and local government authorities, creating an unparalleled repository of human genetic information. China is also aggressively moving towards the creation of a unified, nationwide, publicly accessible format for electronic medical records, while simultaneously ensuring that protocols for protecting confidential data do not in any way impede researchers, companies, and government entities from accessing this vast trove of information. The interpretation of such an immense dataset is simply beyond the capacity of ordinary human minds. It even stretches the limits of contemporary computers. However, with the relentless advancement of supercomputing capabilities, and as the sheer volume of genomic data continues to expand exponentially, scientists will increasingly learn to leverage the tools of artificial intelligence to better understand how complex genetic patterns lead to specific outcomes, how diseases arise, and how traits are expressed. This data, analyzed by powerful AI, unlocks a fundamental understanding of life itself. And once again, guess which nation is poised to dominate this crucial intersection of AI and genetics? China. Because highly developed artificial intelligence will play a paramount role in unlocking the mysteries of the genome, processing and interpreting vast quantities of data that are otherwise incomprehensible. China's determined ambition to dominate this sector will profoundly influence the future trajectory of human genetic engineering. As articulated in Beijing's ambitious Next-Generation Artificial Intelligence Development Plan, published in July 2017, China aims to become the world's primary hub for AI innovation and to secure strategic dominance in these technologies by 2030. Indeed, China is widely regarded as the Wild West of genetics, owing to its expansive and largely unlicensed gray market of assisted reproduction clinics, where ethical boundaries are often more permeable than in other nations. It is therefore hardly surprising that it was in China, where the first gene-edited human beings were controversially brought into existence. A topic I explored in detail in my previous monologue, a premature step into a future many were not ready for. Now, attempt to fully grasp the sheer scale of the challenge before us, to truly comprehend what is at stake. Imagine two distinct groups of people, existing within vastly different political and social realities. Consider, for instance, the European Union, which has advanced further than almost any other entity in the realm of individual rights and data protection. In May 2018, the groundbreaking General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, came into full effect, mandating that every citizen of the European Union must provide explicit consent for their genetic data to be included in any specific database or research study. This represents a strong commitment to individual autonomy and privacy. China, by stark contrast, explicitly grants the state a monopolistic right to utilize all genetic and other forms of data collected from its citizens within its territory, viewing data as a national resource to be leveraged for the collective good, as defined by the state. And while the European Union strives with all its might to prevent the use of genetic data for the creation of a surveillance state, prioritizing individual liberties, China's Ministry of Public Security is meticulously accumulating the largest DNA database in the world, a powerful tool for identification, tracking, and social control. I repeat, for clarity, our understanding of what individual genes or groups of genes actually do is directly proportional to the sheer volume and quality of data available to us. Therefore, the larger and higher quality these datasets become, the more rapidly we will be able to decipher the complex genetic patterns that underlie intricate diseases, understand predispositions, and unlock the secrets of human traits. And, as you have undoubtedly gathered, the entity that possesses the largest and highest quality datasets will be the one that stands at the vanguard of the genetic revolution, wielding all the immense wealth, prestige, power, and influence that such a position will inevitably confer. This control over genetic knowledge is arguably the ultimate form of power. This situation immediately raises a multitude of urgent questions. For instance, what can actually be done to manage this unfolding future? One might attempt to persuade the entire world to refrain from conducting genetic modifications, to implement a global moratorium. But firstly, as we have observed, many societies are enthusiastically rushing headlong into the age of genetics, driven by hope for cures and desires for enhancement. And secondly, consider the track record of global cooperation. While virtually all world leaders generally agree that anthropogenic climate change poses an existential threat, potentially rendering our planet uninhabitable, we, as a species, have lamentably failed even to adopt a truly global convention to try and halt global warming, hampered by national interests and political inertia. So, how could we possibly hope to halt the spread of modified genes, especially considering that all genetic changes, by their very nature, will be passed down through inheritance, much like the blue eyes we discussed, becoming a permanent part of the human gene pool? What then? Should we forbid everyone from traveling to China, erecting new walls in the digital and biological age? Or perhaps prohibit Chinese citizens from traveling abroad, implementing a form of biological apartheid? Would any nation be prepared to employ armed force to halt the genetic alteration of humanity, initiating a, quote, gene war? Ultimately, what will transpire if a powerful nation like China takes the decisive initiative to implement advanced genetic and other technologies to enhance the capabilities of its population, creating a generation of genetically optimized citizens, while another major nation, for example the United States, completely abstains from this initiative due to political, ethical, or other deeply held reasons? What future awaits us a century from now, when these two trajectories diverge significantly? Something tells me that those societies which choose to reject these technologies of genetic modification will, in historical terms, swiftly fade into obscurity, unable to compete with genetically enhanced populations, even if those who embrace them navigate a potentially long period of trial and error and even catastrophic mistakes along the way. Therefore, it is highly unlikely that any nation will intentionally choose to abandon the application of genetic modification technology. The competitive pressure will be too great. More likely, the most open and technologically advanced societies, where the state does not hold a monopoly over genetic editing, will see their markets filled with companies offering advanced gene editing services. These companies will compete to offer the most desirable enhancements, the most effective disease preventions, and the most comprehensive genetic optimization packages. As Jamie Metzl asserts, companies and nations that succeed in cracking the code of diseases like cancer and eventually learn to understand and then modify other complex human traits will not merely become biological versions of Google or Alibaba, wielding immense economic power through information. Their power and influence will be comparable to that of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century, which reshaped continents through military might, the British Empire in the 19th century, which dominated the globe through industrial and naval power, and the United States in the 21st century, which exercises global influence through technological and economic supremacy. This is a new form of power, the power to shape humanity itself. There might be more danger in these words than one might initially perceive. I began to grasp this, in part, while reflecting on the evolution of the modern smartphone market. Consider how rapidly it converged towards the absolute dominance of a few specific companies and the subsequent total uniformity of their products. If, in the future, all prospective parents, driven by a desire for the best, begin to select the exact same optimal genes for their genetically edited children, perhaps the genes for peak intelligence, beauty, and resilience, profound problems will inevitably arise, driven by a massive reduction in genetic diversity and a general decline in the population's capacity for adaptation. Recall the corn we domesticated over 8,000 years? It became so genetically homogeneous that its susceptibility to various diseases significantly increased, making it vulnerable to widespread crop failure if a single pathogen adapted to its uniform genetic makeup. Indeed, there was even a film about this very vulnerability, highlighting the dangers of monoculture. There is a very real, non-illusory danger that such a scenario could play out with humanity. A single, novel virus or an unforeseen environmental shift could sweep through the human population, and there would not be a single individual possessing some crucial, rare, protective mutation to resist it, because that variation had been engineered out of existence. This is merely what we can conceive of, because we are still largely unaware of the immense, profound evolutionary advantages embedded within our natural genetic diversity, across all its varied aspects, many of which may appear neutral or even slightly negative in the present moment, but could prove vital in an unforeseen future. You might think of it this way. If humans possessed the ability to edit genes during the prehistoric era, the selective pressure would have heavily favored abilities essential for immediate survival: sharp senses for hunting, strong muscles for gathering, quick reflexes for escaping predators. Consequently, genes associated with, say, autism or other forms of neurological atypicality, which might have seemed maladaptive in that harsh environment, would likely have been systematically removed from the population. These early gene editors would have had no way of knowing the profound consequences of their actions, because thousands of years later, an autistic mind, with its unique patterns of thought, its capacity for intense focus, or its exceptional analytical skills, might found a revolutionary platform like Facebook, or make a groundbreaking scientific discovery. A gene-modified population of hunters and gatherers, on the other hand, would have had its gene pool permanently conserved, locked into an outdated set of adaptations, lacking the cognitive diversity to innovate and adapt to profoundly different societal challenges. Diversity, in all its forms, biological, cognitive, cultural, is our greatest treasure, if only we can learn to embrace and preserve it, even when its immediate utility is not apparent. But perhaps the most unsettling realization is not even this. Evolution, at its core, is profoundly conservative. When something evolves, the changes must build upon what is already laid down by nature. It tinkers, it modifies, it repurposes, but it rarely designs from scratch. New features are added, and old ones undergo certain modifications, but fundamentally, the core structure tends to remain largely unchanged, a testament to the efficiency of successful designs. It is for this reason that the skeletal structures of a bat's wing, a human hand, and a whale's flipper bear such astonishing similarities. They even possess the same number of bones, demonstrating a common ancestral blueprint adapted for different purposes. Evolution laid down these fundamental foundational cornerstones of basic physiology an incredibly long time ago, and continues to operate within these established parameters. Can we, looking back at this foundational principle of evolution, assert that our complex modern behavior is something entirely new, something without profound genetic roots, something infinitely distant from the behavior of our primitive ancestors. For us, such a question might seem absurd, even outrageous. We tend to believe that our personality, our very sense of self, our unique identity, is an artifact meticulously assembled from the myriad pieces of our life experiences, a purely cultural construct. Yet, suddenly, as we explored in a previous monologue, we discover that almost all of our psychological traits, our predispositions to anxiety, extroversion, conscientiousness, even our political leanings, are profoundly influenced by our genetic makeup, far more than we once believed. Our free will and conscious choices operate within a biologically constrained landscape. It is often asserted that eugenics, or in simpler terms, the selective breeding of humans to enhance desirable traits, is an inherently negative and abhorrent practice, forever tainted by the horrors of the 20th century. Yet we, as a species, are constantly engaged in it, often unconsciously or indirectly. And I am not speaking of the selective breeding practiced by certain ancient societies to produce, for example, Japanese sumo wrestlers over many generations, where physical prowess was overtly cultivated. No, I am referring to the eugenics that we have always practiced, in one form or another, through cultural norms, social pressures, and legal frameworks. Infanticide or child killing is described even in ancient Roman law. Indeed, it was widely practiced throughout the Roman Empire. The fourth of the 12 tables of Roman law explicitly stated, "A father shall immediately put to death a son who is monstrously deformed, or who has a form different from the human race." In ancient Sparta, city elders personally inspected every newborn infant to ensure that no weak or sickly child was allowed to survive, deeming them unfit for their warrior society and leaving them to perish. Various other cultures, pre-Islamic Arabs, ancient Japanese, Chinese, and Indian civilizations, all practiced some form of infanticide, often to limit family size, to dispose of children with disabilities, or due to gender preference. While progressive modern societies no longer engage in such direct forms of infanticide, they nevertheless create laws and societal structures that indirectly amplify the reproductive success of some individuals while diminishing that of others. For instance, individuals with a strong predisposition to violence or cruelty, or those who commit serious crimes, are likely to be imprisoned, which, on average, leads to them leaving fewer copies of their genes in the next generation, a form of societal genetic pruning. Laws supporting education and economic opportunity can inadvertently favor individuals with genetic predispositions for certain cognitive abilities. Modern humanity is, to a significant extent, the result of a subtle, ongoing selection process of genes, and, to a lesser extent, a purely cultural shaping. Our genes are constantly being filtered by the societies we create. We often imagine ourselves to be highly rational beings, capable of critical thought and objective reasoning, masters of our own destiny. But evolution did not select us primarily for such unwavering rationality. It selected us for survival and reproduction, for behaviors that conferred an advantage in our ancestral environment, regardless of their objective truth. Even if you do not ascribe to any existing religion, even if you consider yourself the most thoroughly non-believing individual, it matters not. Because, for the most part, what you believe is not experienced by you as a belief at all. It is felt as a fundamental truth, an intrinsic property of reality. You simply perceive the world as it is, and your internal programming reinforces this perception. Paul Rosen, a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania and a pioneer in the study of magical thinking, posits that with the advent of reason, primary emotions inherited from our animal ancestors dramatically expanded, incorporating, among other things, the concept of contagion, the transfer of defilement through touch. For instance, volunteers participating in Rosen's experiments unequivocally refused to consume juice that had been briefly touched by a sterilized cockroach's antenna, or to eat from a perfectly clean but previously used bedpan. This revulsion is not rational. A sterilized cockroach is harmless, a clean bedpan sanitized. But something deep within us, an ancient, evolved mechanism, recoils from the perceived contamination, from the violation of innate boundaries. While I concede that many individuals might intellectually force themselves to drink the juice or eat from the bedpan, something deep within us would resist, recoiling from the act. What is this internal resistance? It is the profound, ingrained legacy of evolution, shaping our fundamental preferences and aversions. We believe that truth corresponds to objective reality, to a detached, verifiable understanding of the world. But for your genes, this is not the case. For your genes, there exists only one truth, that which enables them to transmit their copies into the next generation. Objective reality holds no sway over them. What matters is adaptive utility. Those primates who were not particularly disgusted by potential contamination, who might have consumed spoiled food without hesitation, did not effectively pass on their genes, succumbing to disease. Those primates who did not experience discomfort and an urge to scratch from a simple cluster of holes, or who were not repulsed by signs of decay, did not pass on their genes, potentially ignoring crucial warning signs. Those primates who did not freeze in alarm at the sight of a stick resembling a snake, instinctively recognizing a threat, did not pass on their genes, becoming easy prey. Those primates who did not experience a strange, inexplicable pleasure from the sound of a gurgling river, and consequently a desire to remain near it, did not pass on their genes, missing out on a vital water source. Those primates who were not drawn, as if mesmerized, to gaze at fire without any immediate, rational reason, and therefore to keep close to it, did not pass on their genes, missing out on its warmth, protection, and cooking benefits. You experience a certain aversion towards individuals with 6 fingers, not because you consciously decided to, but because your genes are programmed to select 5-fingered kin, a marker of typical development. There is nothing objectively or rationally superior about 5 fingers, but it is the norm to which our genetic programming is adapted. This list of seemingly irrational preferences, fears, and attractions could continue far longer than you would be prepared to listen, revealing the pervasive influence of our genetic heritage on our deepest intuitions. We rarely give ourselves full account of the extent to which much of what we do, what we feel, what we desire, is not an act of our free will, but rather the unfolding of ancient programs, much less the complex question of whether free will itself even exists in the way we commonly understand it. It is challenging to fully grasp just how much of our behavior, our deepest impulses and reactions, is not a product of our conscious deliberation. How certain can we truly be that a person's personality, their political leanings, their fundamental character, is entirely detached from their biology, especially when, by merely observing a person's face, one can predict their political orientation with an accuracy of 72%, as some studies suggest? Our biological substrate influences our cognitive and emotional biases in profound ways. For 4 billion years, our genes were meticulously selected by the environment, through a slow, often agonizing process of trial and error, survival and extinction. This is precisely why we are so exquisitely adapted to this specific environment. We are entirely and completely its product, shaped by its pressures and opportunities. And now, we stand on the cusp of editing our own genome, taking the reins of this ancient process. How reasonable, how wise, how rational under such circumstances is it to delegate the selection and modification of our genes to powerful corporations or centralized states? Unlike the environment, which selects blindly and slowly, these entities will not simply favor some genes and impede others. They will be able to asterisk change them instantaneously with deliberate intent. And they will do so, often through a black box artificial intelligence whose decision-making processes can be opaque even to its creators. This is a treacherous path, a slippery slope, because will it not lead to a scenario where, generation after generation, people begin to genetically adapt not just to their physical environment, but also, subtly, to the political and social policies of the states or companies that are selecting and modifying them? This could happen whether through unintentional drift or through deliberate design. Imagine individuals engineered to be absolutely loyal to specific political parties or ideologies, so deeply loyal that changing their opinion would be neurologically impossible, their very physiology hardwired for allegiance. Any attempt to present them with the negative sides of their political regime, to challenge their indoctrination, would cause them profound distress, triggering fear, dizziness, feelings of revulsion, and nausea at a purely physiological level, making dissent a physical impossibility. This is a chilling prospect, a true biological totalitarianism. Or imagine yourself as the owner of a company that provides genome editing services to the public, a company that has captured a significant market share, and such a company will inevitably emerge sooner or later, driven by market forces. Your product is, quite literally, your potential clientele. You are designing them in batches. Would you not at some point be tempted, subtly or overtly, to manipulate the genome in ways that enhance your company's long-term prospects, perhaps by selecting for traits that favor consumerism, obedience, or a preference for your company's future products, subtly engineering your market? But even if such direct manipulation never occurs, even if we assume the purest intentions, think about this. What will be the ultimate criterion for gene selection? If you haven't noticed, even when discussing the enhancement of IQ, we spoke of it primarily in the context of increasing life satisfaction and reducing suffering. If our primary goal, our guiding star, becomes the subjective, personal happiness of each individual as defined by a narrow set of neurochemical states, will we not, in the end, create a homogeneous flock of beings utterly content with the state of affairs, regardless of what those affairs truly entail or how oppressive they might be? Will we, after several tens of generations, become physiologically incapable of even comprehending that we have ensnared ourselves in a trap, a gilded cage of engineered contentment, because the very mechanisms of discontent, of striving, of critical analysis have been selectively bred out? What is true flourishing if it is devoid of challenge, struggle, and the capacity for moral outrage? Of course, this is merely one possible scenario, a speculative thread in the vast tapestry of our potential future. But it is a scenario that the Pentagon, and indeed anyone contemplating the profound implications of our genetic future, would be wise to consider. For in the quiet of the night as we drift towards slumber, the questions we ask about our very essence, about who we are and who we might become, are perhaps the most vital of all. Sweet dreams, curious minds.